Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some truly brilliant work from Nigerian thought leader Uluyomi Oladevid. In her eye-opening piece, Espousing the Culture of Sustainability, she totally challenges us to look past the surface-level numbers of global development. To actually examine the deep, ingrained norms that truly shape our world. We're going to see how she breaks down these invisible forces that direct our lives, and more importantly, how she believes we can intentionally rewrite them. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We're going to cover 5 key areas. First, the engine of global economy. Then, we'll look at the traps of pervasive cultures, followed by the roots of indoctrination. After that, we hit the blueprint for sustainability. And finally, leaving no one behind. So, starting right off with Section 1, the engine of global economy. When we normally try to understand global markets, we immediately look at the hard data, right? Things like inflation rates, GDP, supply chains, all that stuff. But Oladevid argues that if we stop there, we are quite literally missing the points. Listen to this quote from her work. Culture is everything. More than you may realize, culture engineers the entire global economy. This is absolutely her core thesis. She's telling us that it isn't just spreadsheets or algorithms running the world. It's invisible societal norms, the unspoken rules of how we behave, what we actually value. These are the true hidden drivers of our global systems. And what's so fascinating is how she scales this concept. It isn't just some abstract macroeconomic theory floating out there. Culture drives daily decisions at literally every single level of society. It dictates how you or I spend our morning, how a family allocates its budget, how a firm decides to treat its employees, all the way up to how massive government institutions draft their policies. It's the invisible thread connecting the whole shebang. Moving right along to Section 2, Traps of Pervasive Cultures. Now, what's really interesting here is the question it begs. If culture is the engine, what happens when you put bad fuel into it? She presents this almost poetic, yet pretty stark rhythm to describe these toxic mindsets. She writes that wherever the culture of mediocrity prevails, well, perception becomes way more important than reality. Wherever the culture of nepotism prevails, a relative gets prioritized over actual merit. Wherever the culture of idle certification prevails, a piece of paper suddenly pays off more than real technical skills. And wherever the culture of inferiority prevails, blind imitation entirely replaces creative ingenuity. And honestly, the litany just continues from there. She points out that wherever a culture of short-term competition prevails, long-term corporate interest is just destroyed. A culture of bitter division, that completely drowns out any calls for unity. A culture centered purely on the struggle for survival means any perceived threat is eliminated without a second thought. And a culture of blind religiosity means people will blindly follow an erring leader rather than listen to a truth-telling sage. She makes it absolutely crystal clear. These pervasive cultural traps are actively hindering peace, progress, and truth. Which brings us to Section 3, the roots of indoctrination. So how did we even get here? Well, Oladevid strongly believes these toxic cultures aren't just accidental byproducts of human nature. No, they are actively and purposefully engineered. She breaks down the exact step-by-step process sponsors use to create them. First, before a culture is ever fully entrenched, it's packaged as an intensive process of invisible and sometimes visible indoctrination. Second, the sponsors use all sorts of means to push it. We're talking systems of formal education, traditional media, social media, celebrity imagery, and corporate ethos. And third, through this steady, relentless stream of concerted thoughts and actions, an envisioned culture becomes a deeply entrenched intergenerational reality. And she provides a pretty devastating historical example of this in action. Using formal education curriculums, colonial masters actively taught African colonies to wholly embrace all the quote-unquote superior solutions the West had to offer. She offers a specific, very pointed critique that this created a pervasive culture of mental backwardness in the average African. It built a dependence that now requires a deeply visionary reorientation program to finally break free from. And her next point brilliantly illustrates this. Decades after formal political independence, this culture of dependence still persists in some frankly absurd ways. We see inherited Western solutions like drinking hot tea, wearing neckties, and wearing straight hair wigs, completely clashing with the actual African reality of hot weather, sunny streets, and beautiful, natural kinky hair. It's just a powerful, undeniable visual of a dependent mindset operating completely out of context. But don't worry, she doesn't just leave us in despair. She concludes this diagnosis with an incredibly empowering thought. The earlier we make intentional structural transformations, the more predictable our path to true freedom and sustainable development will be. This is our pivot point right here.
We know exactly what the problem is, and now we're moving directly toward her proposed solutions.
All right, Section 4, the blueprint for sustainability.
So, if we need a structural transformation, what exactly does that new structure look like? Well, she provides a highly specific framework for this new intentional culture. First up, she insists we've got to collectively esteem what she calls the 5Ps paradigm. This is the ultimate global focus of sustainability: people, peace, prosperity, planet, and partnerships. These are the big goals we absolutely must orient our societal compasses toward. And to actually achieve those 5Ps, she gives us this definition: SUCCUS. This is her unique acronym for the essential components that absolutely must be prioritized as popular culture moving forward. Think of this as her specific tool for dismantling those colonial hangovers and replacing them with a culture that genuinely serves sustainable development.
Let's see how this builds out. Here's how those pillars actually break down. The first S is for stakeholder mentality, meaning everyone has a part to play. Then U for unity and diversity, C for inclusion, another C for circularity, I for collaboration, and finally, the last S stands for structural transformation. Basically, she's laying out a comprehensive counterculture to those traps of nepotism, division, and inferiority we were talking about earlier.
And right here is her ultimate goal for implementing this entire framework. Instead of constantly importing mismatched solutions, we have to think and grow tailor-made national solutions and build equal partnerships for execution. It's an absolute game changer. She's talking about shifting from a culture of blind imitation to a culture of true creative ingenuity and highly adaptable, localized solutions. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, leaving no one behind. We're really reaching the climax of the explainer now. Having laid out the problem and the framework for the solution, Ola David leaves us with a series of incredibly powerful escalating declarations. First, she anchors this grand global theory directly back to her personal national identity, stating, Nigeria must not be left behind. This transformation has to take root right at home. Then, she escalates her plea to the entire continental level. Africa must not be left behind. It is a powerful demand for a broader structural transformation across the whole continent, completely breaking free from the lingering dependencies of the past. And finally, she brings her vision to its beautiful universal conclusion: no one must be left behind. So the crucial point here is that true sustainability and structural transformation aren't just for one nation or even one continent. The ultimate goal of her entire framework is absolute, radical inclusion for every single human being on this planet. Which brings us to this final thought. As we've seen, culture engineers our economy, our lives, and our future. But as Oluyomi Ola David has so brilliantly shown us, culture is built by us, which means, crucially, it can be transformed by us. So I want to leave you with this question. What prevailing culture will you intentionally transform today to build a sustainable tomorrow? Think about your household, your workplace, your community. It really does start with you. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.